here with Emily. Oops, sorry. I'll hand it over to Emily real quick to introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Emily Sherrod. I lead the Partnership Development Department for City Parks Foundation. Excited to work with you all through the Treetops Grant Program today. I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's ideas.
Thank you, Emily. So today we're going to go over the NYC Green Fund as a whole, just a brief overview. We are going to get into the specifics of the Treetops program's purpose and guidelines. And we are going to introduce to you our new program area, which is urban forestry, courtesy of some Con Ed funding. And we will then get into some of the application details and the overview. I'll mention that the material that you see as it relates to the application structure and some of the questions you might be asked there is nothing that you will not see in the applications and guidelines that we've published. It's just an opportunity to touch on some common sort of question points among the application. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. My hope is that I go, I'll speak as little as I can to cover all of the topics to leave as much room for questions and answers as I can. And that said, we have a bit to get through. So I'm going to go ahead and get started just to kind of provide an overview of the NYC Green Fund. So what is the NYC Green Fund? It's a fund that originated as the NYC Relief and Recovery Fund. And this was in response to COVID-19, a time that I think we can all agree that New Yorkers needed their parks more than ever. This was back in 2020. So we were able to secure some continued support from our donors and from our board, and this fund was able to evolve. Through this fund, which is now the NYC Green Fund, we are offering support for programming, network building, and systems changing work. Our vision with the NYC Green Fund is an equitable and resilient network of parks and open spaces to benefit the well-being of all New Yorkers. You will see this posted in our guidelines. You will see us center many conversations as any NYC Green Fund related conversations on this. So that's really our hope. And we have you all to thank for the important work that you're doing. So thank you. And then getting into sort of that broad structure, something that comes up a lot in my conversation with applicants and with even returning grantees is just what all the fund consists of. So to offer that overview, we have three categories within the fund, and this Treetops Fund is supporting mid-sized organizations that program, steward, and advocate for parks and open spaces across New York's 5 boroughs. We'll get into this more today, but we do this through 7 program areas or activity areas, as you will see on the application. And just to touch on it briefly, our grassroots program is facilitated by our friends at Partnerships for Parks, which focuses on the same program areas, but for organizations with budgets under $175,000. And our third program is our Pathways program, and that program supports systems changing work. We'll have another Pathways round in early 2025, but I'd like to spend our time today discussing specifically Treetops. If you are curious about Pathways and how we define systems changing work, please feel free to either reach out to me or to also check our website. We've published our press release from that last program round earlier this year, and that goes over the types of projects that we funded there as well. And I'll just reiterate here that if you were to apply for Treetops and get funded, that doesn't make you ineligible for Pathways, as long as you stay up to date on all of your reporting. So getting into the specifics of Treetops here and the funding available, we will be able to make grants this year up to $50,000. We can offer 1 or 2 year grants. The second year of those grants are pending funds raised. And we just ask that if you are a new applicant to us, that you apply for the 1-year funding. Just familiarize yourself with the program. As a recap and sort of maybe looking forward what you might be able to expect, our funding in 2023 looked like the following numbers, and our largest grant was $40,000. Our average grant size last year was $28,000. We had 32 projects funded altogether, and almost 2/3 of those projects were 2-year grants. So that all accumulated last year. The first year of those 2 years and the 1-year grants were 913,000 distributed. So with such a high number of those 2-year grants being factored into this year's funding, I just want to emphasize that we do have some funding this year earmarked for that continued renewal. Well, I should just say the renewal of the 2023 2-year grants. And I see some questions coming in on the amounts and Emily getting to those. So thank you for both your question and the answer, Emily. And numbers aside, we can start getting into the program here. So again, the Treetops program is providing funding for mid-size organizations that program, steward, and advocate for parks and open spaces across the 5 boroughs. And Emily, I welcome you to go to the next slide as well when you get the chance. Thank you. So that the way that we define mid-size, I know funders are different. We're defining mid-size as an operating budget of $175,000 to $2.5 million. And we'll always go off the operating budget of your most recently completed fiscal year. And the grant amounts, as earlier mentioned, can be issued for up to $50,000. It is worth noting as well, though, that your ask amount or your request amount should be no more than 25% of your organization's operating budget. Within your project outlines, you'll be able to select between 1 to 3 activities or program areas. And those are stewardship, environmental action, organizational development, youth engagement, health and wellness, arts and culture, and urban forestry. That urban forestry category is a new category. We will be getting into that in more detail in some successive slides, but we're really excited to get to talk about some of this tree care work that we get to embark on. So, and you'll notice too, it's a small change, but for any returning applicants, we took out the live qualifier from arts and culture. So it is just an arts and culture category out of the recognition that we want to support arts and culture that is not specific to live performances as well. And live performances are still very much welcome to apply. It's just that we wanted to encourage all types of arts and culture projects. So moving along, we will get into some eligible and ineligible expenses. You will see this in the application itself. So I'm not going to go through and read every single one. What I wanted to do instead is just call to a couple of points that tend to come up the most in my conversations with grantees, consultations, and I welcome you to read the rest as we go along. For eligible expenses, they do include staffing costs, which also include internships and apprenticeships, just to be clear. So those are funds that could be covered within your project proposal. And on the ineligible side, while last year we could not fund maintenance work of any kind, that restriction does not apply to tree-related work in 2024, which should become more clear as we get into those urban forest grants. But I just want to call out here up top, these are the types of eligible and ineligible expenses that you can expect to see in that first page of the application. And additionally, on that page, you will see that if you are a returning grantee, you must have submitted all of your reporting. You must be up to date on all of your interim and final reporting. And so if you were a Treetops 23 grantee, then you should have an interim report in by now, and you'll have a final report due in 2025. There was also the option to submit a final report in lieu of the interim if your project was already done. If you already did that, you are up to date. But just to call out for any, I do see some familiar faces and names here. So that interim will need to have been submitted by now in order to be eligible for our 2024 program. So getting into the program areas a little bit more, I'll just mention here that our next few slides are going to have quite a bit of text on them, and I'm not going to read all of them, but I am going to kind of provide just brief overviews. And I've found in conversations with you all in one-on-one formats that examples are really helpful. So I'm going to try to provide just sort of examples of what these different categories can look like. I want to be clear that they don't have to. It's not us saying that's what you should do. They are just examples of past projects that have been funded. So starting at the top with stewardship, which is referring to the community care of open spaces. This can include things like a trash cleanup project. Environmental action includes educational and awareness building programs. This can include something like an educational tour of an environmentally impacted place. It can also include something like signage. Organizational development. It's important to us that you all are, securing the foundations you need to develop and continue as an organization in and of yourself. So this organizational development category can focus on things like staff training or even implementation of a new HR system. Youth engagement has to do with workforce development programs. They don't have to be, but it's been a hot topic as of late, and we do tend to see a lot of those workforce development programs come in. And we define that sort of youth category as ages 18 to 24. Young professionals could be another way to look at it as well. Our health and wellness category focuses on the physical, mental, and emotional health of members of the New York City communities. And this can include things like senior exercise classes in the park. We also see a lot of youth programs come in. The big thing with all of these is that this type of programming, all of these programs need to be available to members of the public for free. Our arts and culture category has to do with cultural and artistic programming offered in a public space. And as mentioned earlier, this can include performances, but again, it does not have to include performances. And lastly, and what we will get into more, the urban forest grants category, which is brought to you by Con Edison. We're very grateful for that. And this can include things like tree and tree bed care. So I'll go ahead and move on to that aforementioned urban forest grants program. So we're really excited about this. Con Ed has provided us some funding specifically for urban forest care. Our objective here is to increase NYC's tree canopy from 22 to 30%. And that'll be the 30% is targeted by 2035, and that's in reference to NYC's forest agenda, which aims to engage new and returning tree stewards and to assess the health of existing trees and tree beds. So getting into examples of eligible work for that tree care work, we include tree planting and any tools required for tree planting. A note on this is that NYC Parks is in the process of planting trees in NYC Heat Vulnerability Index areas 4 and 5 by 2027. As a result, we do suggest planting in HVI areas 1 through 3, particularly along the borders of 4 and 5 could be beneficial, but we do not require applicants to plant trees only in the areas that NYC Parks is not currently focused on. Again, this is linked out on the application and guidelines as well, but I just wanted to mention here that we have been communicating closely with NYC Parks to understand what their strategy looks like and how we can complement that strategy and build off of that strategy. So another form of tree care work is tree care and stewardship, and any tools affiliated with that. So there's the planting itself, and then there's the tree care itself as well. So we include that here. We include the fostering of public engagement through educational and stewardship events. This can include events like City of Forest Day, Arbor Day, and there are others. If you're not familiar with City of Forest Day, I did link to it in the slide deck, and we'll go ahead. It's also linked to in the guidelines. We'll share the slide deck, but welcome you to check that out as well. We include tree guard installation here. There's a price table and a inquiry form linked to if that is helpful to you all. And I just want to call out here as I continue through this list that you might touch on one of these, you might touch on a couple of these within your tree care work, but much like our activity areas, we don't have an expectation of, oh, we really need to see this, this, and this. It really has to do with what your organization is well positioned to do and what you're interested in doing, work you might already be doing. We just want to make sure to connect the work that's happening and can be happening to the existing funding source. So we can, in this program as well as tree health assessment and tree rescue, the education that goes along with all of these affiliated points, the giveaway events with trees or plants, because we also include the tree beds. Those need plants too. And I'm not sure how familiar or unfamiliar you all are with, gardening and growing things, but that root retention is also really important. So tree bed care can include things like planting flowers in a tree well, that kind of thing. And lastly, we include staff training and professional development related to forestry and tree care. NYC Parks facilitates a citizen pruner program. That can be one example, but there are others, and it'll be really helpful, I think, to kind of familiarize yourself with that aspect of the guidelines, and we've linked out to a number of resources as well. So the resources, some of the resources here that are specifically related to the tree care work, I've listed and linked out to here as well. I'll just briefly summarize what each entity is. If you are already familiar with it, I apologize for any redundancies. I've learned a lot in this aspect of the program, so I'm excited to share it. So Tree Time fosters public-private partnerships in urban forestry and raises public awareness of the importance of urban forestry, conservation, and stewardship. And it promotes new technologies to enhance tree survival and advance innovative management tools and revitalization of municipal trees. NYC Park Stewardship helps with the forest and wetland restoration in New York, things like plantings of street trees and the harvesting and propagating of native seeds and the monitoring of local wildlife. Forest for All is a broad and diverse coalition of 150 plus public, nonprofit, and private sector organizations that implements the 12 actions of the NYC Urban Forest Agenda, which is a roadmap to protect, maintain, expand, and promote the NYC urban forest. And lastly, the USDA Forest Service offers some tools as well, including one likely the most relevant here, which is iTree. It's a state-of-the-art peer-reviewed software that provides urban and rural forestry analysis and benefits assessment tools. So with all of these resources, You are welcome to find them if you end up selecting urban forest work as one of your program areas, one of your activities. You are not required to. I want to be clear about that. We have been in discussions with folks who have already been doing this work, who we can thank our existing urban canopy for, and they have been a huge, huge help. We appreciate their support and their continued work very much. We welcome you to also tap their shoulder and also understand that some of you have already been doing this type of work and might already have your own protocol, and it might not include these organizations, and that's okay. They are simply resources if it is of interest to you all. So moving along to sort of something that you'll see in the application itself, and something that comes up a lot in my conversation with applicants are the activity areas and the metrics. And I'm working to call our activity areas as such. Sometimes I do use that term activity area with program area. Just to clarify, the activity areas are those 7 program areas that we've discussed earlier. They are the areas that you will select in your application. You can select anywhere from 1 to 3 activity areas, that is. I get a lot of questions around what's better. Should I stick to one and focus on one, or should I choose 3 of them to sort of broaden my net? And the answer is it's up to you. It's important to us that you are applying for projects that you are positioned for, excited for, have the capacity for. So I just would emphasize to you all that if you are really well equipped to be doing, let's say, tree care work, let's say urban forest work, then apply under that and focus on that. If you're thinking, hey, we do want to do some of this work, but also we really have this internal work organizationally that we need to focus on, add a second program area. That works too. I hope it's not a sort of clear as mud answer, but Emily and I both work really hard to make sure that you all get to represent your work to your greatest needs. So, we can get into, if you schedule a consultation with me, we can get into more specifics by organization of what you've been doing, what you want to be doing. But that's sort of my generalized, advice for you all. So I've put down an example of what the activity area selection could look like for stewardship here. We, as of last year, added a metrics component to our application, and this helps us assess our impact as an organization. It helps us secure more funding. So we're really trying to do 2 things, which is assess our impact, and we want to make sure we're not doing so in a way that feels extractive to you all. So we are asking for metrics, and we're hoping it feels relatively flexible for one, and hopefully straightforward. So to do that, we did offer some examples in the application. Each activity area has an example. I just happen to choose stewardship. It tends to be included in a lot of applications. So for stewardship, you can see required metric, which is number of volunteer hours. And so that's unique for that program area, for that activity area. But when you select stewardship, you will see your 2025 target number of hours is requested and required. And then you'll see the number of hours in your most recently completed fiscal year. And again, this is your number of volunteer hours. And then below that, it'll drop into some other target areas, which you will get to decide how you define them and what those look like for you. So as an example, and this is the example that's provided on our guidelines as well, Target 2 can be to increase your volunteer projects. And usually we'll ask for, by what percent. So if you are to say we want to increase our volunteer projects by 200%, last year we did 5 projects, and next year we want to do 15 projects. And we're going to prove this, or this will be evidenced by the number of volunteer projects held annually. that this is again just an example. I don't want you all to think you need to be putting down 200% increases for your projects. That's just an example. Another example would be for your third target to increase your volunteer base by 10%, let's say. And again, that is an arbitrary number that we put there. So if you are trying to increase your volunteer base of individuals by 10%, then you would tell us what you had last year and what you want to have next year and how that will be evidenced. In this case, it could be evidenced by the number of individuals on your email list. It could be evidenced by number of volunteers or new volunteers at events. You get to choose what you're measuring and how you're measuring it. These are just things that we came up with to provide some type of contextual example. And our last example here is, let's say, increased number of skilled volunteers by engaging more volunteers in advanced trainings. And again, we used a pretty high percentage as an example, 100% more volunteers. Last year you had X amount of volunteers. This next year you want to have Y amount of volunteers. So again, these targets, which you see here is 2 through 4, are up to you to determine. You don't have to fill out that many either. I also want to emphasize that we understand that growth is not always going to be a component of this. It's important that the work is continued, and we don't necessarily always need to see things like 100% and 200%. It's a more nuanced conversation that I'm happy to get into with, in any of our consultations as well. But just as somebody who really cares for this program and for the work that you all are doing, I just want to emphasize that these are strictly examples, and we leave it to you to define what sustained success looks like on your part. And the sort of biggest thing with all of this is that we just want you to be able to report on it. Another question that's come up a lot in consultations is, what happens if I don't meet that target number? That's okay. We just, in your report, if you don't meet that target number, it doesn't mean that the project was a wash. It's helpful for us to understand what types of obstacles were met, and that way we can understand how better to support you. What are some program areas we might be overlooking? What other tools do these organizations such as yourself need to be able to be successful in this work? That kind of thing. So I'm gonna keep moving here to the breakdown of our scoring criteria. It's one more slide. Thank you, Emily. So our scoring criteria, I'd included on that previous slide just for transparency for you all, just what is included in the proposal. And I realized I don't need to necessarily repeat what we already wrote in the guidelines. I really want to focus on, common question areas. So I'm moving along to our scoring criteria here, but happy to get into any of the proposal components as we get into the Q&A as well. So for our scoring criteria, these are the 4 categories that we have based our criteria on. Starting with strategic alignment, we are looking at the extent to which the proposed activities align with NYC Green Fund's vision and guidelines. And, that can range. This is just to give you an idea of what our review panel is sort of rating on how strong was this aligned, maybe how not strong. So it's not a yes or a no, it's a range. It's a sliding scale. For community served, we are looking at how your project serves all communities. How are you defining those communities? How are you including those communities? Who is your community? If you're looking at, for example, the offering of workout classes in a park for, let's say older individuals, retired individuals, then, that might be a community that your programming is focused on. And that that also serves your broader community, right? Because they are a part of your bigger community as well. So it'll be, you'll get your opportunity to find like what is your focus area and why. And we also understand as a funder that that plays into a broader conversation of a thriving community. Getting into the feasibility, we're looking at things like your existing resources, relationships, and experience. Did you just start doing this work, or have you been doing this work for a while? Have you been in partnership with other organizations that are also doing this work, having these conversations with other stewards and programmers across the city? Things like that. With tree planting and tree care, we do again suggest coordinating with the partners that I've mentioned earlier, mostly because they're willing to help and share their expertise, which is huge. Again, it's not required. I spoke to somebody in a consultation already who'd mentioned it seemed like a lot of things to kind of cross off a to-do list. I don't want those resources listed to seem like a barrier to the urban forest grants. So truly it is optional, and our hope is that it would actually make the projects easier for you. So if any of you have any questions about what that can look like, please feel free to reach out. On that tree care work, the earlier the better. All right, and then getting into the budget, probably not too different from other funders here, but we're just looking to see that the budget demonstrates a clear and pressing funding need. And again, at 25% max of your operating budget. You know, if people are saying, hey, which project should I apply under? One thing I tend to at least ask them, again, I'm never going to tell you what you should apply under. I can tell you what I think might see more success in a review, which does not include, I'm not a final decision maker. But your budget, or sorry, when it comes down to having a myriad of projects you might be working on and what to apply under, you could consider things like urgency as well, which I know isn't a new concept to any of you, but I'm just throwing it out there that can help delineate priority. And again, it doesn't have to. But I do want to be really clear that on our scoring criteria here, this applies as it has in all of our years past, and we will be pushing the urban forest grants a bit because of our access to that funding this year. So I just want to offer transparency in that. It doesn't mean that those are the only grants that we're going to issue by any means. It does mean that I will bring it up in a consultation. And if that's not what your organization is interested or positioned to do, that is okay. Apply under whichever program area is the best fit for you. But I just want to offer that transparency from the funder side. Lastly, we can get into the selection priorities of that scoring criteria. So our priorities on the next slide here are to do with, what we as a funder have identified as our own funding priorities. They are not eligibility requirements. And so we will be looking at these. We will not rule out applications because they don't have these. The applications will still be eligible. So priority area number 1 is whether the project focuses on properties identified as NYC Parks property. We offer funding for programming within our NYC parks and open spaces, as long as the open space is publicly accessible, free to access, that is eligible. We do, because of our partnerships with NYC Parks, we will prioritize those, and that's just, to again offer transparency. We have funded projects that don't exist on NYC Parks property. I'm just mentioning these as, our stated priority areas, so they are not a surprise to anybody. We will also look at whether the project takes place in an environmental justice area, which we have linked out to on the map. It's designated by the mayor's office. And we are going to look at whether the applying organization is what your leadership structure looks like. Does it include Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in positions of leadership? Does it not? If it doesn't, are you addressing that in any way? Do you see a need to address that in any way? Do you have a plan? And this is centered on a call to the importance of equity in our programming. So again, these are our priorities, not our nuts and bolts requirements, and that really sums up our what we're looking at in terms of program areas, how we're reviewing these proposals, and I'm going to move along to next steps for you all. So I've been offering consultations and will continue to offer them. I invite you to please reach out to NYC Green Fund at cityparksfoundation.org to schedule a consultation. I also have a Calendly, which I'm going to update again today. It's been a little finicky with the calendars option and how I'm aligning that with my own calendar. So I emphasize that anybody can also reach out to NYC Green Fund at cityparksfoundation.org to just directly ask me, hey, when can you meet? It is my priority to be as available to you all between now and the due date of October 11th as possible. So, if there's a half-hour slot that works for you, please reach out. And again, I will also update the Calendly as well and send it to the participants from today. And then I just want to also encourage you to ask any questions. If it's to say that if you have a question you want to have a meeting about, that's great. Let's do it. And if you've got a quick question of, hey, I'm noticing this on the application, what can I do this for my budget format? Feel free to also email me, especially with things that have to do with page formatting. Sometimes email can be better, but again, that's up to you. Just emphasizing that you can reach out in a number of ways here. And this recording is going to also be available on our CPF website. We've got a YouTube channel, and so we'll link to it from the CPF website there. And our application deadline, as a reminder to all, is October 11th at noon. I recommend, starting earlier if you can. I recognize everybody is very busy. A lot of you are familiar with open water by now. Like any grants management system, there can sometimes be little, quirks, let's call them, in the system. Open water is great, by the way, but I'm just, if I forget to kick out a due date or something like that, these are things that I want to make sure, we might be able to cover as soon as possible. So, just let me know when questions come up, and maybe earlier than the 11th at 11 a.m. might be helpful. But I will be very much as many of you applying as you're interested in as we can get, and we're here to help however we can. We are now going to enter the Q&A component of the webinar here. And so I know Emily has been getting to some questions in the chat function, and we can go ahead and take a look. Emily, are there any questions from the chat that we needed to address before we get into verbal questions?
We have covered everything in the chat thus far, so
cool.
Feel free to hop in if there are questions that have come up that that haven't been answered yet.
Awesome. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for asking some questions in the chat, you all. Are there any other questions that folks might have as it relates to any of the material covered, maybe material you saw in the guidelines that wasn't covered, anything at all? We'll also welcome any comments. So it's not just me and Emily talking this entire webinar.
Vanessa, I have one question. Thank you for sharing all the information. It was great. I have a question. Is there a specific budget template, or do we have to upload the budget while we are completing the application?
That's a great question. We do have a budget template, and I can go ahead, either Emily or myself will go ahead and drop that in the chat function. It's also linked out on the guidelines as well, Aram.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it because that's the one thing which we have to keep in mind when we are doing the application. If there is certain percentage of certain expenses that we can do, like a consultant, we can use like some of the grants have this criteria that, oh, you can use only 10% of the grants for consultants or something like that. So I just want to clarify that thing. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome, and good to see you again, too. Anyone else? Hi, Jen.
Hi, Vanessa. Sorry, I was typing it and then I was like, oh, I guess I could share.
Honestly, either way, whatever you're most comfortable with. I read your question and happy to
Okay.
get into it. So for the groups applying to the second year, if you got a 2-year grant, you do not need to submit another application. If that's
How do we know if our grant was for 1 year or for 2 years? Was that
It was in your grant agreement, but I can look into Bronx's blooming real quick for you here. But it would have certainly been in your grant agreement.
okay? Because I know that we would have applied for 2 years. We did apply for 2 years. So
Okay,
Emily
got
can
you.
follow up.
Oh, I'm sorry, say that again.
Emily said she can follow up as well. So if other people,
Perfect. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, and that goes for any returning applicant. If you applied for 2-year and you can't remember if you got that 1 or 2-year funding, when you log into your open water account, you will be able to see your last year's application, which is sort of a consolidated one-stop shop for your everything from your eligibility quiz last year to your if you were funded your grant agreement. So you will be able to find that grant agreement there and see what your funding was. And Jen, yeah, we will definitely follow up with you to confirm whether it was 1 or 2 there.
great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And yes, Mara, I went a little bit wait, did I go out of order? So just to kind of get to the $50,000 question here, it is per year, correct. I do want to set expectations. That's why I included the max amount last year, which was 40,000, and then the average amount. But just to be clear, when you apply for a 2-year grant for 50,000, you are asking for $50,000 in 2024 and again in 2025. And again, that second year is pending our own funding in that 2025 year as well, which we've been successful in delivering on so far, but is very much a contingency. So, all right. And then in terms of the environmental justice areas, Mara, yes. And it is defined by the mayor's office. I'm grabbing you the link right now to drop in the chat. And it is also linked on our guidelines as well. So I'll go ahead and include that. And I see some hands raised. I am unsure who raised their hand first. So okay, Merope, if you would like to ask.
Hi, thanks so much for this. This was super helpful. A quick question on the youth development part of it. I think you had mentioned that the focus was like ages 18 to 25. Does that mean that activities having to do with like K through 12 would be like not applicable or not eligible in the youth development area? Or like, if there was a high school age program, for example, that was a part of this, would that be something we could include in our proposal?
It's a great question, and it's 18 to 24. So something that I actually notice a lot with the youth engagement component anyway is there's a lot of similarity. There can be a lot of similarity, or I guess consistencies and projects between the environmental action and the education. So the environmental action components can often include educational components. And then with that, those can cover beyond the ages of 18 to 24. So basically what we're trying to say is not that you can't apply at all, but just that you might select a different activity area. So if it is environmental action, that makes sense. I would say K through 12, without knowing like specifically your programming, I could go in one direction or another with that. But I would say for K through 12, if it's educational, I would assume it would have to do with either, our environment, open spaces, parks, nature, or health and wellness, or arts and culture. So you might be just looking at one of those categories instead. But let's definitely follow up after the call too, to maybe get some more specifics, and then I can guide you more specifically. Okay, and then there are a number of you, so just with hands raised, I want to make sure. I see Janny. I think Janny already had their hand up. Maybe we can take your question.
Yeah, hi, how are you, Vanessa? It's good to see you again. And I see Merope, it's been so long since I've seen you. That's so cool. So I just wanted to ask about the request for the multi-year. I saw it was new applicant. I want to make sure that it's not a new grant, it's not new grantees that are encouraged to do. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but it's new applicants can only apply for 1 year, and then others can apply for the 2-year. Is that correct?
If you haven't received a grant from us since 2020, we would ask you to apply for 1-year funding. Cool. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, Danny.
Hey, Vanessa, and thanks for this. It's been really helpful. I'm curious if grants are awarded partially or if you only do full amounts. I'm curious, like if a group applies for 20K, there's only 10K available. Do you do partial grant awards?
We do. Yes. Great question. And
Okay.
we do. We find as a funder that we would rather at least have that conversation with you and see if that feels sufficient on your end, rather than make a judgment call on our end. So, with that, in our past grants round and our past pathways round, something that we practiced was if it were an amount substantially below what was asked for, I'll reach out and have a conversation and ask, basically, does this work for you? Does this change your project outcome? If you ask for, 50,000 and let's say you're only offered 20,000, we don't expect that to not impact the outcome of your project. So we might ask for an updated timeline in your grant agreement kind of thing. That's just to clarify on all fronts that we don't expect $50,000 of work to be done with a much lesser amount. So all of this is to say that yes, we will fund at a lesser grant amount in some cases, and that you can also expect for us to likely have a conversation to discuss if that works for both of us.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Jessica.
Hi, so technically, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm at a boathouse with limited service. Our park is technically a block to 2 blocks out of an environmental justice community, and the waterfront mostly isn't designated, but something like 95% of the population we serve lives in an EJ justice community. Should I talk about it in terms of population served? Because there are part of it is just the age of the map, and part of it is we're a block away. It's the waterfront, and then a block in is a designated EJ community. So
yeah, no, I'm glad you bring this up because there is nuance to that, classification of EJ areas. A lot of the parks as well as the waterfronts themselves are not EJ areas, to your point. So we do often look at what borders that rather than that space itself, which will seldom be classified itself as an EJ area. And I will always encourage applicants to emphasize the communities that are served. So I would need to see like specifically where your work is taking place and the community served. And this is to say, highlight that the community served in your application. And if you want as well, there's an area you can mention it in your proposal, but also another thing that works too, because I'm going in and I'm internally classifying the EJ areas. So you're also welcome to like make sure to put it on my radar with the note of like, hey, just want to make sure this area itself is not included as an EJ area, but it's actually the people from this neighborhood, which exist immediately outside on all sides. I should put that together. I do put that together in the classification of the EJ areas, but I also welcome you to make sure that we're having that conversation and keeping that front of mind.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. So I will do a last call here for any other questions. And thank you again, Emily, for being extremely diligent in the chat. It really helped us keep things moving along. And Janny, to your comment, yes, essentially a change of scope. And again, like that will be a conversation. So I'm looking to see if we've missed any in the chat. If I'm not seeing any that maybe I haven't gotten to, please feel free to call it out now. And are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, it was really good to see you all and to just see the interest in the program. We really, really appreciate the work that you all are doing. I hope that you have a good rest of your day. And if you have any questions at all, please reach out to NYC Green Fund at cityparksfoundation.org. It'll be myself or Emily in that inbox. Again, happy to set up a call. If you have a quick question and you're like, hey, I really don't have 30 minutes, can we just talk really quick? The point here, we can do that. The point is that it is flexible. We are here to support you in the way that you need. So just feel free to reach out and keep the line of communication going. I will send a reminder for the email, for the application deadline. I usually try to send it between the 1 to 2 week mark. So you can expect a reminder there. And then just sort of as a quick recap of the dates that you can expect once I find, yeah, okay. We do have that deadline of October 11th at noon. And then once you submit your application, you can expect to hear back on that application by the end of November, just to offer transparency there. Once you hear back from us on our funding decisions, we get things moving pretty quick with the grant agreement and the payments. So, all right. That's it for me. I hope you all have a really great day and hope to talk to some of you or as many of you as possible soon.